Accessing peace. Existing without violence, with the ability to calmly resolve conflict. Downloading love. An overwhelming, deep, positive affection towards others. Activating liberty. Living your life as you see fit without infringing on the lives of others.
Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism. And before I get into what I want to get into, I want to make sure that I tell you about something new. Yeah, that's right. There's something new. I know there's the saying, there's nothing new under the sun, but every now and then something new comes along. And that is the FPP Radio forums. Yes, you heard that right. We're bringing back forums. Actually, we're not bringing back forums. Forums have never really gone away. As LL Cool J once said, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. Well, yeah, I've been here for years, but the FPP Radio forum has not been here for years, but forums have existed for a really long time. And now there's one for FPP Radio. You can find that at forum.fppradio.com. forum.fppradio.com. Now, I'm not anticipating a lot of traffic on the forums, but it's there. It's a thing. And, yeah, check it out if you like. forum.fppradio.com. And no, that is not something that is being hosted by me. It's a, I guess third party would be the correct term, but that's not what it really is. So there's been the Shire forums for a while, the Shire Society forums. And then that recently opened up a little bit to where it was the Shire Bitcoin, not Bitcorn. Although, somebody could have bits of corn, I don't know. But the Bitcoin forums, they're still through the Shire Forum, but not necessarily limited to just signers of the Shire Society Declaration. And in an attempt to get a broader user base, Ian Freeman, who runs the forums, reached out to me and several other producers of media content that are located in the Shire and said, hey, would you like to have a forum? And I said, yeah, I'm on. So he created that, and then I created the handy short URL, forum.fppradio.com. So what is on the table today? Well, I've got two things here, one from Lifehack, one from Forbes, and, as I often do when I've got multiple things, I don't really know which one to go with, so I did sort of an eeny, meeny, miny, mo, flip back and forth between the tabs in the browser. And, well, let's go with the article from Forbes. And this is one of those to where, it's very interesting. And because this show is partially therapy for me as much as it is a self-help sort of thing to where I am hopefully trying to encourage people to improve themselves, become a better version of themselves. And I know that this is something that a lot of other people deal with, but not a lot of people want to admit. And that is loneliness. Headline, loneliness might be a bigger health risk than smoking or obesity. Again, article comes from Forbes, and it begins with a question from someone on the website Quora. I guess I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not really sure. Quora, where he says, I'm feeling so lonely. Can I die from it? That question originally appeared on Quora, the knowledge-sharing network, where compelling questions are answered by people with unique insights. Can you die from loneliness? Yes. Yes, you can, actually. This is actually a very important issue, and not just a psychological issue, but a medical one as well. In the last decade alone, physicians and researchers have begun looking deeply into the impact of loneliness and social isolation on health, well-being, and morality, and the data on the subject is overwhelming. A lonely person is significantly more likely to suffer an early death than someone who is not lonely. But we're so connected. It's easier now to connect with anybody, is what you may be thinking. But is that really true? Certainly, it's a lot easier now to communicate with people, but are you really connecting with people on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Yik Yak, on Kik, on Skype, on Telegram, on any of these social networking things? Are you really connecting? Or are you just communicating? And is there a difference? Yes, there definitely is a difference between just communicating and connecting. But I digress, and I continue with the article. Most of the research, that being the research on how loneliness and social isolation affect health, well-being, and morality, most of that research is centered around geriatrics, as you might guess, where feelings of loneliness are powerfully predictive of mortality. Mortality, not morality. I think I accidentally said morality a couple of times. Meant to be mortality. I guess my sometime onset dyslexia kicked in there, and I misread it earlier. Please forgive the mistake. The article continues. A few years ago, researchers at Brigham Young University conducted an influential meta-analysis of scientific literature on the subject and found that social isolation increases your risk of death by an astounding 30%, and some estimates have it as high as 60%. We'll continue with more here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $1 per month through Patreon and get perks like ad-free versions of FPP Radio News and Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. That's fans.fppradio.com.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up in any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. We'll continue with the very interesting, I believe, article from Forbes about loneliness, and we'll get into the health risk. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about a way that you can keep your money in the free market, assuming that you use free market money and you do use alternatives to the fiat-centric government-issued currency, right? You do use Bitcoin, you use some of the altcoins, Dash, Zcash, things of that sort, right? Well, if you do, then let me tell you about a website that you definitely need to bookmark. That would be Spend-A-Bit. Spend-A-Bit is the search engine for things you can buy with Bitcoin and other alternative currencies using things like Shapeshift. Spend-A-Bit has aggregated millions of products, about 2.5 million the last time I looked. Millions of products from thousands of Bitcoin-enabled merchants. All of these things you can buy with virtual currency. Keep your money in the free economy. Spend-A-Bit. Use my affiliate link, spendabit.fppradio.com. And if you're a Bitcoin-accepting merchant like I am, ask about their merchant suite to reach even more customers. That's spendabit.fppradio.com. Spendabit.fppradio.com. Back to the article from Forbes about loneliness. And particularly, we're talking about a study done a few years ago by researchers at Brigham Young University. And here's a brief quote from the study, Loneliness and Social Isolation as Risk Factors for Mortality. Actual and perceived social isolation are both associated with increased risk for early mortality. I'm going to pause to emphasize two words. Actually, three. Actual and perceived. What do I mean by actual and perceived here on social isolation? So there are the people who are physically isolated, whether it be somebody that's in solitary confinement in jail, someone who is homebound. They are unable to leave their house due to some physical injury. There are people who are otherwise, physically isolated from other people that have no or very limited human interaction. And then there is perceived social isolation, the people that are the outcast, where, certainly, that they walk among you, if you will, but they don't really have in-depth human interaction. So there are two types of social isolation, actual and perceived, both of which have an increased risk for early mortality. In this, back to the quote from the study, in this meta-analytic review, our objective is to establish the overall and relative magnitude of social isolation and loneliness and to examine possible moderators. We conducted a literature search of studies using Medline, CNAHL, that's an acronym CINAHL, PsycInfo, Social Work Abstract, and Google Scholar. The included studies provided quantitative data on mortality as affected by loneliness, social isolation, or living alone. Across studies in which several possible confounds were statistically controlled for, the weighted average effect sizes were as follows. Social isolation odds ratio, 1.29. Loneliness, 1.26. Living alone, 1.32, those corresponding to the average of 29, 26, and 32% increased likelihood of mortality, respectively, or about 30%, as they mentioned earlier. They say here, we found no difference between measures of objective and subjective social isolation. Results remain consistent across gender, length of follow-up, and world region, but initial health status has an influence on the finding. Results also differ across participant age, with social deficits being more predictive of death in samples with an average age younger than 65. Overall, the influence of both objective and subjective social isolation on risk of mortality is comparable with well-established risk factors for mortality. Forbes now says, to put this another way, loneliness might be a more significant health factor than obesity, smoking, exercise, or nutrition. And interestingly, this is true whether the person feels lonely or not. And there are a few different factors to think about. Psychologically, loneliness and social isolation have extreme comorbidity with a whole host of other issues, as you might expect. So what goes along with social isolation, whether it be what they list as actual or perceived? Depression, anxiety, dementia, substance abuse, even things like manic depression and schizophrenia. Now, you might be asking, and this is not something that is answered in this study, but how many of these things, the depression, the anxiety, the dementia, the substance abuse, schizophrenia, manic depression, they don't say whether those things are a cause of isolation or if they are a result of. And they're not trying to get into, the chicken or the egg here of which causes which, but they definitely correspond with one another. Loneliness, both its objective state and feelings of loneliness, is also the psychological state most associated with suicide, to the point where it's safe to say that while not all lonely people are suicidal, all suicidal people are lonely. Read that again one more time. Not all lonely people are suicidal, but all suicidal people are lonely. Stay tuned. There's more here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davi Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com, all major bookstores, and now available as an audiobook. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, Spendabit, and Amazon at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry, online at fppradio.com.
Hey, welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism, and we're talking about loneliness, specifically the health effects, the adverse health effects of feeling lonely. Again, to repeat something that is mentioned earlier, loneliness might be a more significant health factor than obesity, smoking, exercise, or nutrition. Going over a few different factors to think about from the study Loneliness and Social Isolation as Risk Factors for Mortality. Loneliness and social isolation also have innumerable practical or circumstantial effects that can contribute to an early death. If you have an accident or are struck by a sudden health event, there may not be anyone around to help you. You could have some disease state symptom that's far more likely to be noticed if you regularly interact with other people. There's a quote here from the study. They say, "Too often the first sign of someone who has been left alone is a funny smell and post backing up in the mailbox." Likewise, self-maintenance or even just regular old health habits are something lonely people are a lot less likely to engage in without the sort of encouragement or accountability others might take for granted. You're more likely to engage in good hygiene, for instance, more likely to remember to take your pills, get out of the house, encouraged to adopt healthier habits, or guilted into at least moderating bad ones, etc., if you interact with other people. Lonely people tend to eat worse, get less exercise, not sleep well. You may also be financially poorer, and so on. And again, they are not saying that, these things are the result of loneliness, or whether or not loneliness is brought on because of these other things. So again, the chicken and the egg. They say even something as stupidly simple as if your house catches fire in the middle of the night, you have a better chance of noticing it quickly if there are more people there. On a very practical level, human beings just fundamentally have a better chance of surviving in social and familial groups than in isolation. Now, one thing I want to back up where they talk about some of the health things, to where, let's just say that you live alone, you don't have a roommate, and something happens. You fall in the bathtub or something. It might wind up taking a while for someone to notice. So there definitely are benefits of having at least a roommate. Now, I understand not everybody wants a roommate, and that's fine. Now, a personal story. One time, several years ago, probably back in 2008, I believe. So, yeah, about a decade ago, I was driving home from work. I had a electric scooter. Most people would call it a moped, but it's not a moped because mopeds have pedals. But at a scooter, was driving home from work, and wound up a bee stung me in the neck. I thought, like a rock or something popped up off the road and hit me in the throat. And it was, it started to hurt. And I reached up and felt, there's a bee here. And so I pulled it out, was able to pull out the stinger still while riding, and stopped at a CVS or a Rite Aid that wasn't too far from where I lived. And because I had had an adverse reaction the last time I got stung, I knew, hey, I need to, go see the pharmacist and get something. And I, am explaining to the pharmacist and was like, hey, I'm really thirsty right now. And she said, you know what that means? You're going to sit down and you're not leaving until I tell you can. And, part of that was also, during the discussion of, I had an adverse reaction the last time I wound up getting stung. And one of the questions was, do you have a roommate or, somebody that you live with? Nope, live by myself. She was, yep, you're staying here, take some Benadryl. Because I was worried about what if something happened. What if I actually do wind up going into anaphylactic shock? Because, again, the last time I got stung, and it was like a really extreme situation where I got stung like 20 times by some ground hornet thing in my left leg. The ground hornets were in the ground and then came up and stung me in the left leg as I was mowing grass. And I almost went into anaphylactic shock, like I was getting the symptoms of. But luckily, the ex-wife, who at the time was the wife, got me to the ER, and they were able to get fluids in me and prevent me from going into shock. But I did black out for a brief period of time, although I don't think I ever told the wife that I actually did black out on the way to the hospital. So, yeah, going into shock, pretty scary. So you could imagine my concern of, hey, I don't want to wind up being home alone, go into shock, and then, I'm off the next 2 days. It's going to be 3 days before anybody realizes that Darryl's dead from having gone into shock from getting stung in the throat by a bee. So, that's my weird story about, scared of dying alone in an apartment and nobody noticing for several days. There's more to this article. And, of course, as always, the link will be in the show notes. We'll be back Stay tuned. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to BIPCOT.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
Bitcoin Not Bombs is a launching pad for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs into the financial freedom of the Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin Not Bombs offers premium publicity campaigns designed to facilitate an organization's adoption of Bitcoin as a payment system. Bitcoin Not Bombs is fully committed to being the hub of the nonprofit sector of the Bitcoin economy, maximizing the potential cross-promotion of all our clients and commercial partners. To learn more, visit bitcoinnotbombs.com.
Hi, this is Roger Paxton from the Lava Flow Podcast, the Free Coast Freecast, and Pax Libertas Productions, and you're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism. And going through the article, and I'm not going to have time to finish the article, but going through the article from Forbes about some of the health dangers of loneliness. Again, there was a study done by some researchers at Brigham Young where actually what they did was they analyzed other studies on the subject and came up with some information, again, about a 30% increased risk of early death if you are lonely, whether it is what they call actual or perceived. There is no difference, medically speaking, of whether or not you are, like physically cut off from people or if you just are mentally cut off from people. Continuing on, they again had different factors to think about. One of them was the psychological and then the practical or circumstantial. And they say while those two are somewhat intuitive, there's a third factor that we are only just now beginning to understand. Even the absence of its effects on your emotional state and psychological well-being, besides its direct practical impact on your life, loneliness itself appears to have a direct physiological impact on the body. So not only is there a psychological impact, but there is a physiological impact as well. In this sense, we are increasingly beginning to look at it similar to how doctors now view stress as something that in and of itself detrimentally impacts the body. There are literally hundreds of ways that this happens, from hardening your arteries to depressing your immune system to corroding your brain. And again, some of the things that they mentioned earlier about people that are lonely also generally have one or more of the following: depression, anxiety, dementia, substance abuse, manic depressive episodes, and schizophrenia. And again, they're not saying, which is the chicken and which is the egg, but there's definitely, the correlation between them. Again, more to this study, but just to reiterate, loneliness can kill you, but not all people that are lonely are suicidal, but everyone who is suicidal is lonely. And don't forget, every Friday I answer your questions. Send those over ama@fppradio.com.
The podcasts of FPP Radio are licensed under Copy Heart. We believe that copying is a form of flattery and do not abide by the copyright laws. Those laws serve to restrict the flow of ideas which no one can really own. Copying is an act of love. Love is not subject to law. If you enjoy the show, consider joining the Fans program and get perks like ad-free versions of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio and FPP Radio News, and also get a copy of the monthly newspaper FPP News. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com.